Right, in this lesson, we're looking at a couple of things. So unicellular versus multicellular organisms and stem cell versus specialized cells or differentiated cells. All right, let's start off with unicellular organisms. This is still topic 1.1. So unicellular organisms are nice and simple, and they can carry out all of those 7 functions of life in one single cell. Sometimes they move, sometimes they are stationary, but all in all, their cell size is limited by how big, or their cell size is limited because of the surface area to volume ratio. So if something gets very, very big, their surface area actually gets quite small compared to their volume. So we'll look at that a bit later on. So some unicellular organisms are paramecium, amoeba, bacteria, and yeast. And you'll see them under the microscope in lots of different ways. Really important subject point or syllabus point is about paramecium. We need to be able to investigate the functions of life in a paramecium. So they have cilia, which are those little hair-like structures along the outside, and that's what helps them respond to change, and they can move that way. So they actually reproduce asexually, which means they're doing binary fission, which is like a form of mitosis, which means their offspring will be identical. They can engulf their food, so that's the nutrition part, and they can break it down in small little vacuoles, which is part of their metabolism as well, and that happens out in the cytoplasm. They can remove their waste via an anal pore, so that's the excretion part, and there's quite a lot of this kind of stuff happening across the cell membrane where the gas control is happening as well, so oxygen can come in if need be. Right, your textbook does a really good job of looking at this, so I would recommend you go and find that, please. All right, chlorella is another photosynthetic unicellular organism, so it doesn't need to be taking in food as we know it. It can do photosynthesis, so it can create a form of its own food there. So it's photosynthetic, and it's a type of algae. It can multiply very, very rapidly because it's that single cell object, so that's pretty common really. Right, in the cytoplasm, a lot of that metabolism of nutrients can happen, and its membrane can diffuse the gases across. So if it's photosynthetic, it's diffusing CO2 into the cell, and it's creating O2, and that's pushing it out again. All right, it has contractile vacuoles, and what that can do is pull that water in and push it out again. And so there's a lot going on. Those 7 functions of life can happen in a very small object. This one is a unicellular object, but it's not an organism, but it's a kind of algae, so it's Volvox algae, and it lives in a colony. So it doesn't live on its own, but they're not considered multicellular. They work together, but they're not fused, and that's the difference here between these kinds of unicellular organisms and multicellular organisms. So multicellular organisms have properties that emerge from the interaction of their cellular components, which means all those single cells are now fused to create one organism or one giant mass. They are cooperative, those cells. So even though there are lots of different types, they are working together for the same cause. And that's that's known as emergent properties. That means the whole is greater than the sum of their parts. So even though each little section is doing their bit, the muscle cells are doing their bit, and they're combining to make muscle tissue, and then they're doing forming the heart, and then that's part of the vascular system. Really, all these parts are joining together to make one big organism, and you are functioning because of all these different types of cells. All right, we have stem cells, and those stem cells are very undifferentiated cells, which means they can be anything they want. There are stem cells that are considered pluripotential. They have the potential to be any kind of cell they want. And those stem cells start us off in embryonic development. Eventually, though, they have to become all the different cell types that we know. They can become muscle cells or blood cells or nerve cells or all those kinds of things, but they start out kind of default. They start out with nothing really happening but the potential to do anything. So stem cells can divide and change. So that differentiation means they are turning into something else. And their ability to do that, to divide and turn into another cell, is what helps us to grow when we are an embryo, but it also gives them amazing potential in other areas. So it can turn into lots of different cell types and replicate itself. And that means we can use them in a lot of medicine areas. Okay. So a stem cell challenge is that they are very difficult to find. We have them in our adult body in certain types. So we have, say, blood cell stem cells, but they can only turn into other kinds of blood cells. That means they are called totipotent. They are no longer pluripotential. They are totipotent. They have some potential, but not completely all of it. We can also find stem cells in embryos and in cord blood, or the umbilical cord. Now, because of that, there comes a lot of ethical questions with, say, taking stem cells from embryos, and they're things we're going to discuss in class. Taking them from an umbilical cord, however, might be very different. All right, your textbook does a really good job of this as well. So even though we like to think, there are a lot of ethical concerns about stem cells, there are amazing applications. Now, the Australian of the Year in 2018, Professor Alan McKay-Sim, he was taking cells from your nostrils or in your nasal cavity and actually turning them into, or switching them on and allowing them to do work in the spinal cord to fix paraplegics. But you can also use stem cells to create, say, lab-grown meat, right? So it's not all about medicine. It can be many other different areas. Now, if you have undifferentiated cells, so those unspecialized cells, we have to be able to turn them into a certain cell type. And we do that using the cell's genomes, or the coded instructions inside the nucleus. And what that allows us to do is have a division of labor and makes it efficient in the body. It means not one cell is trying to do every single job. Okay, just like in a school, the teachers are doing the teaching, the client services people are doing their job, the marketing people are doing their job. So we have 220 cell types in the human body, and it's those genes in the nucleus that are causing that to happen. And what happens is the genome is controlling which job is allocated. So every single cell has every single instruction for every single job, but it's which one those switches are flicked on. Think of it like a recipe book. We've got every possible recipe you could ever need, but whichever one we're going to cook that day, we're just going to keep that page open, and that's the one we're doing, okay? So specialized cells have their certain job. Red blood cells carry oxygen, and they are shaped in a way that lets them do that efficiently. Those striated muscle cells, or the skeletal muscle, have certain properties that let them do that. Neurons can be nice and long, those dendritic parts stretching right out to reach in lots of places to allow those connections to happen and that movement and response to happen. We've got the sperm and the egg, so those reproductive cells that have specialized structures to do their job. In the pancreas, we've got alpha and beta cells that can produce insulin and glucagon, and again, that is their one job and they have to do it well. In the kidney, we've got cells that filter all of your blood and produce the urine so that we can excrete the waste. In our small intestines and large intestines, we have very large segments of tissue that have huge surface areas, and that allows us to absorb lots and lots of nutrients efficiently. Right, lots of syllabus links in this particular topic, so please make sure you do some reading in your syllabus and in your textbook.